The lecture hall fell silent as heavy footsteps echoed across the metal floor. Professor Veltos entered the room like a force of nature, his 8-foot frame casting long shadows under the artificial lights. His scales caught the light with each movement, creating an almost hypnotic pattern of deep green and black. The saurid professor moved with the fluid grace of a born hunter, every step calculated and purposeful. His vertical pupils swept across the assembled students, cataloging each face with predatory precision. 37 students from 12 different species filled the tiered seating of Xenobiology Advanced Studies. The course was notorious throughout. Harmony 7 station for its brutal difficulty and even more brutal professor. Most students who attempted it dropped out within the first month. Those who remained learned to fear the sound of Veltos approaching their desk during examinations. Near. The front clicks adjusted his position nervously. The Mantari student's compound eyes tracked the professor's movement while his forearms fidgeted with note-taking devices. Behind him, resonance of deep thought hummed at a low frequency that indicated stress among the crystalline quartz folk. The sound was barely audible to most species, but Veltos heard it clearly. He smiled, revealing rows of serrated teeth. In the back row, almost hidden behind taller students, sat the human. Emma was her name, though Veltos rarely bothered with individual names unless a student proved particularly interesting or particularly stupid. She appeared neither. Small by galactic standards, with unremarkable brown hair and pale skin, she seemed to disappear among her more exotic classmates. While other students prepared recording devices and opened textbooks, Emma pulled out a simple paper notebook and began sketching something in the margins. Veltos had taught for 30 years across 7 different worlds. He understood student psychology better than most understood their own species. Fear was a useful tool. Respect born from intimidation created the proper learning environment. Weak minds crumbled under pressure, but strong ones emerged sharper. His methods were harsh, but effective. The galaxy's top xenobiologists had sat in these same seats, learning to think like predators themselves. Today's subject was ecosystem dynamics in hostile environments. Veltos began his lecture by describing the death world of Karas Prime, where temperatures could shift 200 degrees in a single day, and the native flora actively hunted anything with a heartbeat. His voice carried easily through the hall, each word precisely enunciated. He spoke of adaptation and survival, of the endless war between predator and prey that drove evolution across the galaxy. As he spoke, Veltos moved through the aisles, between seats. Students instinctively leaned away when he passed. Their heart rates increased, their breathing became shallow, and their postures shifted to defensive positions. These were natural responses, programmed by millions of years of evolution. Even sapient minds could not completely override the ancient warnings that screamed danger when an apex predator drew near. Emma continued sketching, seemingly oblivious to the tension that filled the room whenever Veltos walked past her row. Her hand moved steadily across the paper, occasionally pausing to consider some detail. She never looked up when the professor's shadow fell across her desk. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed. It was unusual behavior, but not unprecedented. Some students froze completely when faced with perceived danger. The lecture continued with discussions of evolutionary pressure and environmental adaptation. Veltos described how species developed specific traits to survive in their native environments. The Mantari evolved their compound eyes to detect movement across multiple spectrums. The quartz folk developed resonance communication to coordinate defensive strategies. The Nereid adapted gills that could process toxins from polluted water. Each species carried the marks of their world's particular brand of hostility. When Veltos asked for questions, several students raised hands or appendages. Cliques inquired about metabolic adaptations in extreme temperatures. Resonance of deep thought questioned the role of symbiotic relationships in survival strategies. Each question received detailed responses that demonstrated both the professor's vast knowledge and his impatience with simple thinking. Emma raised her hand near the end of the class period. Veltos paused, surprised. The human had never participated in discussion before. He nodded in her direction, curious to hear what she might ask. Her question was simple and direct. She wanted to know why most species developed defensive adaptations rather than offensive ones. The question itself was not particularly sophisticated, but something in her tone caught Veltos' attention. There was no nervousness, no deference, just genuine curiosity. He explained that defensive adaptations were generally more energy efficient and provided better long-term survival advantages. Most prey species that survived to achieve sapience had focused on avoidance rather than confrontation. Aggressive species often destroyed themselves before reaching technological advancement. Emma nodded and returned to her sketching without further comment. The exchange was brief and unremarkable, yet Veltos found himself thinking about it as students filed out of the lecture hall. There had been something in the human's manner that felt different from typical student interactions. She had not seemed impressed or intimidated by his reputation. Her question had been asked with the casual interest of someone seeking information, rather than trying to impress a professor. As the last student left, Veltos gathered his materials and prepared for his next class. The human had been attending for 3 weeks now without incident. Her test scores were adequate but not exceptional. Her attendance was perfect, but her participation minimal. She represented exactly the type of average student that usually faded into the background of his memory. Still, as he walked toward his office, Veltos found himself replaying their brief interaction. Something about Emma's complete lack of fear response bothered him in a way he could not quite identify. His predator instincts had been honed over generations of evolution. They rarely provided false information about potential threats or interesting prey. Perhaps he would pay closer attention to the quiet human who sat in the back row and sketched during his lectures. Academic careers were built on understanding the unusual, and Emma was beginning to seem very unusual indeed. Her casual manner, in the presence of a known predator, suggested either remarkable courage or remarkable foolishness. Time would reveal which. 3 weeks into the semester, Professor Veltos decided the human needed closer attention. Emma continued her routine of arriving early, claiming the same back row seat, and filling her notebook with detailed drawings while apparently ignoring the lectures entirely. Her test scores remained solidly average, suggesting she absorbed just enough information to pass without distinguishing herself. This pattern irritated Veltos more than outright failure would have. Students who failed, his course at least provided the satisfaction of confirmation. His teaching methods worked by separating the intellectually strong from the weak. Those who could not handle the pressure revealed themselves quickly and departed, leaving room for more suitable candidates. Students who succeeded earned his grudging respect through demonstrated competence under stress. Emma fit neither category, existing in a frustrating middle ground that defied his understanding of academic psychology. During a particularly complex lecture on neural pathway development in apex predators, Veltos decided to force the issue. The subject matter was among the most challenging in xenobiology, requiring students to understand not only the biochemical processes involved, but also their evolutionary implications across multiple species. Even his best students struggled with the interconnected concepts and mathematical relationships. Veltos had spent the previous hour building an intricate explanation of how predator brains developed specialized regions for tracking prey behavior patterns. The neural structures involved were microscopic, the chemical processes barely understood even by leading researchers, and the evolutionary timeline stretched across millions of years. The lecture required sustained attention and active mental engagement to follow the logic from one point to the next. Emma appeared to be drawing a detailed picture of some kind of flower, occasionally glancing up at the projection screen when Veltos changed slides. Her posture suggested boredom rather than concentration. Other students leaned forward in their seats, frantically taking notes and asking clarifying questions. The human seemed to exist in a separate reality, where advanced xenobiology held no more interest than watching paint dry. Veltos positioned himself directly in front of Emma's seat, towering over her desk. His shadow blocked the light from her notebook, forcing her to look up and acknowledge his presence. Around the lecture hall, other students tensed visibly. They recognized the signs of an impending academic execution. The question Veltos posed was deliberately complex, combining 3 different aspects of the lecture into a single inquiry that would challenge even resonance of deep thought, who had been taking detailed notes throughout the entire presentation. He asked Emma to explain how the development of specialized tracking neurons in saurid brains related to the chemical composition of their primary prey species, and how this relationship might affect colonial behavior patterns in mixed species environments. The lecture hall fell completely silent. Several students actually stopped breathing while waiting for Emma's inevitable humiliation. The question required not only understanding the material just presented, but also synthesizing information from previous lectures and applying it to theoretical scenarios. Even if she had been paying perfect attention, most students would struggle to formulate a coherent response. Emma looked up from her flower drawing with mild interest, as though she had just noticed there was a class happening around her. She blinked once, seemed to consider the question for a moment, then began speaking in the same casual tone someone might use to comment on the weather. Her answer was not only correct, but demonstrated understanding that went far beyond what Veltos had expected. She explained the neural development process with precise terminology, connected it to prey biochemistry through pathways he had not explicitly covered, and extended the analysis to include behavioral implications he had not considered himself. Her explanation flowed naturally from one concept to the next, revealing a grasp of xenobiological principles that rivaled his own. But what truly unsettled Veltos was Emma's manner of delivery. She spoke without notes, without hesitation, and without any visible signs of stress. Her heart rate had not increased when he approached. Her breathing remained steady throughout her response. She showed no defensive postures or nervous behaviors. Most remarkably, she maintained eye contact with him while speaking, something even his most confident students rarely managed during intense questioning. When she finished her answer, Emma returned to her flower drawing without waiting for acknowledgement or praise. The lecture hall remained silent for several seconds while Veltos processed what had just occurred. He had intended to demonstrate the consequences of inattention. Instead, he had discovered that the human possessed knowledge and analytical capabilities far beyond what her casual behavior suggested. Over the following days, Veltos increased his scrutiny of Emma's performance. He called on her more frequently, posed increasingly complex questions, and extended his queries to material from supplementary readings that most students never bothered to complete. Each time, Emma responded with the same effortless competence, often adding insights that enriched the discussion for other students. Her casual demeanor never changed. She continued sketching during lectures, occasionally glancing around the room with the mild interest of someone observing and mildly entertaining. When called upon, she would look up from her drawings, provide comprehensive answers to difficult questions, then return to her artwork without ceremony. The other students began to take notice. Click started positioning himself where he could see Emma's notebook, hoping to understand what captured her attention during lectures. Resonance of deep thought began analyzing the patterns in her responses, searching for some system that might explain her remarkable performance. Even the normally antisocial Nereid student began paying attention when Emma spoke, recognizing the value of her contributions. Veltos found himself increasingly frustrated by his inability to categorize Emma within his understanding of student psychology. She displayed none of the behaviors associated with high academic achievement, yet her performance suggested intelligence and preparation that exceeded most graduate-level students. She showed no fear response to his intimidation tactics, yet she was not openly defiant or challenging his authority. She seemed genuinely uninterested in impressing anyone, yet her answers consistently impressed everyone who heard them. By the 6th week of semester, Veltos had begun to suspect that Emma was far more than she appeared. Her casual dismissal of academic pressure suggested either supreme confidence in her abilities or complete indifference to the consequences of failure. Her detailed sketches, which he had initially dismissed as distraction, began to seem like evidence of observational skills that operated independently of conscious attention. Something about the quiet human who sat in the back row was beginning to trigger ancient warnings in Veltos' predator instincts. His evolutionary programming whispered that Emma represented something dangerous, though her small size and peaceful behavior provided no obvious evidence to support such concerns. The contradiction between his logical assessment and instinctive reaction created a persistent state of unease that grew stronger with each passing day. Professor Veltos had always trusted his instincts. 30 million years of saurid evolution had refined predator awareness into something approaching supernatural accuracy. His ancestors had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and ecological collapses by recognizing threats and opportunities faster than competing species. That genetic heritage now whispered increasingly urgent warnings about the human student who sketched flowers during his lectures. The warnings made no logical sense. Emma posed no obvious threat to anyone in the classroom. She rarely spoke unless directly addressed, never challenged his authority, and showed no aggressive behaviors toward other students. Her academic performance, while surprisingly competent, fell short of truly exceptional. She attended class regularly but participated minimally in discussions. By every measurable standard, she represented exactly the kind of unremarkable student who typically faded into academic obscurity. Yet something primitive in Veltos' brain screamed danger whenever Emma was present. The feeling had grown stronger, over the past month, evolving from mild unease to active discomfort. He found himself unconsciously avoiding her section of the lecture hall, choosing to pace in front of other students rather than approach her desk. When circumstances forced him to walk past her seat, his scales would reflexively darken to defensive coloration patterns he had not displayed since childhood. The contradiction between his logical assessment and instinctive reaction began affecting his teaching. Veltos caught himself speaking more quickly when Emma was present, rushing through material he would normally explore in detail. He asked fewer questions during her attendance, unconsciously avoiding interactions that might focus her complete attention in his direction. The behaviors embarrassed him professionally and confused him personally. During a lecture on fear responses in sentient species, Veltos decided to study Emma more systematically. The irony was not lost on him that he was using academic tools to analyze his own fear response to a student. He positioned himself where he could observe her, while discussing the physiological changes that occurred when prey species encountered predators. Every other student in the lecture hall displayed textbook examples of stress responses as Veltos prowled the aisles. Heart rates increased, breathing became shallow, and postures shifted to defensive configurations. These reactions occurred even among species that intellectually understood they were in no actual danger. Evolution programmed such responses too deeply to be overridden by conscious reasoning. Emma remained completely relaxed throughout the entire lecture. Her pulse stayed steady when Veltos approached her area. Her breathing never changed rhythm. She showed no defensive postures, no nervous behaviors, and no signs of elevated stress hormones. Most remarkably, she continued sketching with the same smooth hand movements regardless of his proximity. The complete absence of fear response troubled Veltos more than active defiance would have. Fear was natural, healthy, and appropriate when facing a recognized predator. Emma's lack of reaction suggested either profound ignorance of danger or complete confidence in her ability to handle threats. Given her demonstrated intelligence, ignorance seemed unlikely. Veltos began paying closer attention to Emma's artwork during lectures. What he had initially dismissed as distraction revealed itself to be detailed anatomical studies. Her sketches included precise drawings of saurid scale patterns, Mentari joint structures, and quartz-folk crystalline matrices. The level of detail suggested not casual observation, but systematic analysis of potential vulnerabilities. Each drawing focused on structural weak points that would be invisible to casual observation, but obvious to someone studying anatomy for specific purposes. Emma had sketched the gaps between saurid scales where nerve clusters lay close to the surface. Her Mentari drawings highlighted the vulnerable joints that connected exoskeleton segments. The quartz-folk illustrations showed harmonic frequencies that could shatter their crystalline structures. The realization that Emma had been conducting detailed vulnerability assessments of every species in the classroom sent ice through Veltos' nervous system. Prey species did not typically study predator anatomy unless they were planning to become predators themselves. The casual manner in which she had been gathering this information suggested either academic interest or something far more concerning. Veltos decided to test his growing suspicions during the next lecture. He announced a pop quiz on predator-prey relationships, specifically focusing on the psychological aspects of dominance hierarchies. The questions were designed to reveal how students understood the dynamics of power and control in natural systems. Most students answered in predictable ways, describing textbook examples of alpha predators maintaining control through displays of strength and aggression. Their responses reflected standard academic understanding filtered through their species' particular perspectives. The Mantari student emphasized stealth approaches, the Quartz folk focused on group coordination, and the Nereid discussed fluid adaptation strategies. Emma's answer was different. She wrote about apex predators that never needed to display dominance because their position was so secure that challenges never arose. She described hunters that could kill without effort, move without detection, and control situations through presence alone. Her essay discussed how true apex predators often appeared deceptively harmless to potential prey, using camouflage not for hiding, but for approaching targets that would flee from obvious threats. The content of Emma's quiz response would have been unsettling enough, but her handwriting revealed even more disturbing information. She had completed the entire exam in 12 minutes, writing in perfectly steady script that showed no signs of stress or hurried composition. While other students struggled with the time limit and complex questions, Emma had finished early and returned to her sketching. After class, Veltos remained in the lecture hall reviewing Emma's quiz answers. The psychology she described matched patterns he recognized from studying the galaxy's most dangerous predator species. Her understanding of dominance dynamics suggested personal experience rather than theoretical knowledge. Most troubling was her casual tone throughout the response, as though she were describing familiar concepts rather than academic theories. Veltos realized he had been approaching the situation incorrectly. Instead of trying to understand why, Emma seemed dangerous. He should have been asking what kind of creature could trigger predator instincts in a saurid, while appearing completely harmless to conscious observation. The answer to that question would require research into species that specialized in deceptive hunting strategies. That evening, Veltos accessed the Galactic database and began searching for information about human evolutionary history. What he discovered made him question everything he thought he understood about predator-prey relationships. According to the files, humans evolved on a planet classified as uninhabitable by most galactic standards. Earth was a Class 12 death world where survival required capabilities that seemed impossible for creatures as physically unremarkable as Emma. The data described persistence hunters that could track prey across continents, endurance capabilities that exceeded most mechanical systems, and pattern recognition skills that bordered on precognition. Humans apparently evolved to hunt megafauna through sustained pursuit over impossible distances, wearing down larger and stronger prey through relentless pressure that never allowed rest or recovery. Most unsettling was the psychological profile. Humans were described as social predators that used cooperation and intelligence to overcome individual physical limitations. They could adapt their hunting strategies to any environment, learn from single observations, and maintain focused attention for extended periods while appearing completely relaxed. Veltos closed the database files and sat in darkness, processing implications that challenged his fundamental understanding of galactic power structures. Emma was not an unremarkable student who happened to irritate his instincts. She was a representative of a species that had evolved to be the perfect hunter, disguised by appearance and behavior that concealed lethal capabilities behind a facade of harmless normalcy. The next morning, when Emma entered the lecture hall and took her usual seat in the back row, Veltos saw her clearly for the first time. She was not small and harmless. She was compact and efficient. Her casual sketching was not distraction but reconnaissance. Her lack of fear was not ignorance but confidence born from absolute certainty about her position in any hierarchy that might emerge. For the first time in his academic career, Professor Veltos understood that he was not the apex predator in his own classroom. The field trip to Research Lab 7 was supposed to be routine. Professor Veltos had arranged for his advanced xenobiology students to observe live specimens in controlled environments, giving them practical experience with the theories they studied in lectures. The lab housed dozens of dangerous species from across the galaxy, each contained within specialized habitats designed to prevent escape, while allowing detailed observation. Emma walked among her classmates with the same casual interest she showed during lectures. She paused occasionally to examine containment systems, tilting her head slightly as she studied the various security measures. Her notebook remained open, and she continued her detailed sketching even while walking through the corridors lined with transparent barriers that held creatures capable of killing most known species within minutes. The other students stayed close, together in defensive clusters, their evolutionary programming making them nervous despite multiple layers of protection. Clix kept his compound eyes scanning constantly for potential threats. Resonance of deep thought maintained a low harmonic frequency that indicated stress. Even Professor Veltos felt tension creeping through his muscles as they moved deeper into the facility. Dr. Reed, the lab director, led the group through a series of observation chambers containing progressively more dangerous specimens. She explained the research being conducted on each species, describing their hunting methods, defensive capabilities, and the specific containment protocols required to keep them safely isolated. Her voice carried the confident authority of someone who had spent decades working with lethal organisms. The first indication of trouble came from the central monitoring station. Warning lights began flashing in patterns that meant containment breach in progress. Dr. Reed stopped mid-sentence and activated her emergency communicator, speaking in rapid codes that indicated immediate evacuation procedures. Around the lab, automated systems began sealing blast doors and activating defensive barriers. Through the transparent walls of Containment Unit 12, something moved with liquid grace across the artificial landscape. The Voidstalker was 12 feet of perfectly evolved killing machine, engineered by a long-dead civilization to be the ultimate hunter. Its black carapace absorbed light completely, making it difficult to track with standard optical sensors. Multiple rows of serrated teeth lined its elongated skull, and its 6 limbs ended in claws capable of cutting through most known materials. The creature had somehow bypassed 3 separate containment systems without triggering any alarms until it was already loose within the lab complex. It moved through ventilation shafts with impossible speed, its flexible body allowing navigation through spaces that should have been physically impassable. Emergency protocols activated throughout the facility, but the Voidstalker had been designed to defeat exactly such measures. Students scattered in every direction as the creature emerged from an overhead grate directly above their observation group. Clix dove behind an equipment console, his natural camouflage making him nearly invisible against the metal surfaces. Resonance of deep thought created a high-frequency barrier that might confuse the creature's sensory organs. The Nereid student flowed toward the nearest emergency exit with desperate speed. Professor Veltos positioned himself between the Voidstalker and his students, drawing upon every predator instinct his species possessed. His scales darkened to full combat coloration as he prepared to fight a creature that outmatched him in every measurable category. The Voidstalker was faster, stronger, better armed, and specifically designed to kill apex predators like himself. Still, his evolutionary programming would not allow retreat while students remained in danger. Emma stood up from where she had been sketching near the observation window. She closed her notebook carefully and set it aside, taking a moment to ensure her pencil would not roll off the surface. Her movements were unhurried and precise, showing no signs of panic or fear. The Voidstalker oriented toward her immediately, recognizing potential prey that was not fleeing or defending. What happened next occurred so quickly that most witnesses could not follow the sequence of events. Emma stepped forward to meet the charging creature, moving with fluid economy that wasted no motion or energy. Her hands found specific points on the Voidstalker's carapace that should have been impossible to locate without detailed anatomical knowledge. The sounds that followed were brief and final. 12 seconds after the Voidstalker emerged from the ventilation system, it lay dead on the laboratory floor. Emma stood over its body, checking to ensure the creature was completely motionless, before turning away to retrieve her notebook. Her breathing was steady, her pulse unchanged, and her expression showed mild satisfaction at having completed a necessary task. The silence that followed was profound. Security teams arriving with heavy weapons found students and faculty staring at a scene that challenged their understanding of biological possibility. Dr. Reed ran emergency protocols while trying to process what she had witnessed. Professor Veltos felt something fundamental shift in his perception of galactic power structures. Emma returned to her sketching as though nothing unusual had occurred. When Dr. Reed approached with questions about her actions, she explained, in the same conversational tone she used during lectures, that humans evolved on what the galaxy classified as a Class 12 death world. Such planets were considered theoretically uninhabitable by most species due to extreme environmental conditions and predator density. She described Earth with casual familiarity, mentioning temperature variations that would kill most galactic species, atmospheric conditions that were toxic to many life forms, and native predators that made the Voidstalker seem relatively harmless. Humans had survived not through superior individual capabilities but through intelligence, cooperation, and adaptability that allowed them to become apex predators despite physical limitations. The explanation continued with details about human hunting strategies that had developed over millions of years. Persistence hunting involved tracking prey across impossible distances, wearing them down through sustained pursuit that never allowed rest. Pattern recognition abilities let humans predict behavior several moves ahead, making escape nearly impossible. Once they decided to hunt something, Emma mentioned almost as an afterthought that humans were social predators who used tools and cooperation to overcome individual weaknesses. They could adapt their strategies to any environment, learn from minimal information, and maintain focused attention for extended periods while appearing completely relaxed. Their pain tolerance was extreme, their endurance legendary, and their capacity for violence when threatened was essentially unlimited. As medical teams attended to students suffering from shock, Emma gathered her belongings and prepared to leave for her next class. She paused beside Professor Veltos, who remained motionless near the dead Voidstalker, his predator instincts finally providing clear information about what he had been sensing for weeks. The quiet human who sat in the back row and sketched during lectures was not what she appeared to be. She was a representative of the galaxy's true apex predators, disguised by evolution and necessity to appear harmless until circumstances required otherwise. Her casual demeanor was not disrespect, but the confidence of a creature that had no need to assert dominance because its position was unquestionable. Word traveled through Harmony 7 Station with the peculiar speed that accompanied truly extraordinary events. Students whispered in dormitories, faculty discussed the incident during private meals, and security personnel filed reports that would never be fully believed by their superiors. The human student who killed a Voidstalker with her bare hands became a legend before the week ended, though Emma herself seemed completely unaware of her newfound notoriety. Professor Veltos found his entire teaching methodology transformed by a 12-second encounter that redefined his understanding of predator-prey relationships. The confident aggression that had served him throughout his academic career now seemed not only inappropriate, but potentially dangerous. His instincts, finally provided with accurate information about the threat level Emma represented, counseled caution and respect rather than dominance displays. The change in classroom dynamics was subtle but profound. Students still arrived early and prepared their materials with the same dedication, but their attention was no longer focused exclusively on Professor Veltos. Emma remained in her back row seat, continuing her detailed sketching while seemingly ignoring the lectures. But now every student in the class was aware of what those casual drawings actually represented. Clix had discovered that Emma's anatomical sketches were perfectly accurate, down to microscopic details that required either advanced scanning equipment or impossibly precise observational skills. Her drawings included structural information that was not available in standard textbooks, suggesting she was conducting original research simply by watching her classmates during lectures. The implications made him deeply uncomfortable about sitting still for extended periods. Resonance of deep thought had analyzed Emma's behavioral patterns and concluded that she operated according to systems of logic that were either highly sophisticated or completely alien to conventional understanding. Her responses to questions suggested knowledge that went far beyond the course material, yet she never volunteered information or attempted to demonstrate superiority. The contradiction fascinated and terrified him in equal measure. Even the normally antisocial Nereid student had begun paying attention to Emma's contributions during class discussions. Her insights often revealed connections between concepts that were not immediately obvious, suggesting thought processes that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. She approached complex problems with the casual competence of someone for whom such challenges were routine rather than exceptional. Professor Veltos had unconsciously altered his teaching style to accommodate the presence of a true apex predator in his classroom. He no longer prowled the aisles with predatory intensity, instead remaining near the front of the room where his movements would not trigger defensive responses in other students. His voice had lost the edge of aggression that once intimidated weak minds into submission. The irony was not lost on him that Emma's presence made him a better teacher. Without the tool of intimidation, he was forced to rely on knowledge and clarity to maintain student attention. His lectures became more engaging, his explanations more detailed, and his interactions with students more supportive. The classroom environment improved dramatically once the apex predator established her position without needing to assert dominance. 3 weeks after the laboratory incident, Professor Veltos prepared to deliver his final lecture of the semester. The subject was evolutionary pressure and adaptation, topics that had taken on new meaning after witnessing practical demonstrations of concepts he had only understood theoretically. He had spent considerable time revising his materials to reflect a more nuanced understanding of predator-prey relationships. As students filed into the lecture hall for the last time, Professor Veltos felt something approaching nostalgia for the semester that had challenged every assumption he held about galactic power structures. Emma took her usual seat in the back row, opened her notebook to a fresh page, and began sketching what appeared to be a complex geometric pattern. The lecture proceeded smoothly through discussions of adaptation strategies and survival mechanisms. Students asked thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine understanding of the material, rather than fear-driven attempts to avoid professional embarrassment. The atmosphere was relaxed but focused, creating the ideal environment for learning that Professor Veltos had always sought but never achieved through intimidation. Near the end of the class period, Professor Veltos opened the floor for final questions or comments. Several students offered observations about concepts that had particularly interested them during the semester. Others asked about advanced topics they might encounter in future courses. The discussion was engaging and productive, representing exactly the kind of intellectual exchange that made teaching worthwhile. Emma raised her hand for only the second time all semester. The gesture immediately focused every student's attention on her, though she seemed unaware of the intensity with which her classmates waited for her words. Professor Veltos nodded in her direction, genuinely curious about what the semester's most remarkable student might want to discuss. Her request was simple and polite. She explained that she had another class on the opposite side of the station, and the transit time would be longer than usual due to scheduled maintenance on the transport systems. Would it be acceptable if she left a few minutes early to ensure she arrived on time for her next commitment? The question hung in the air with weight that seemed disproportionate to its simple content. Here was a being who could kill apex predators without apparent effort, who possessed knowledge and capabilities that redefined galactic understanding of human potential, and who had spent an entire semester demonstrating why her species represented the ultimate expression of predatory evolution. She was asking permission to leave early. Professor Veltos recognized the profound irony of the moment. Emma was not requesting permission because she needed his approval or feared consequences for leaving without it. She was demonstrating the kind of casual courtesy that characterized true confidence. Apex predators did not need to announce their dominance or disregard social conventions. They could afford to be polite because their position was secure, regardless of how others perceived their actions. The realization struck him that Emma had been teaching a lesson about power dynamics that was far more sophisticated than anything he had presented during his lectures. True strength did not require display or demonstration. Real predators did not need to intimidate or threaten. Genuine apex status came from capabilities so overwhelming that dominance was never questioned because challenges never arose. Professor Veltos stepped aside and gestured toward the exit, with a respect that surprised both himself and his students. For the first time in his academic career, he was deferring to someone else in his own classroom, and the action felt completely natural and appropriate. Emma gathered her notebook of anatomical sketches and stood with the same unhurried grace she had shown throughout the semester. As she walked toward the exit, every being in the room understood they were witnessing something significant. The galaxy's definition of predator had quietly expanded to include a species that hunted with patience, killed with kindness, and dominated, through a complete lack of need to demonstrate superiority. At the doorway, Emma paused and turned back to face the class. She thanked Professor Veltos for an interesting semester and told her classmates she had enjoyed learning alongside them. Her words were genuine and friendly, delivered with the same casual warmth she might use when saying goodbye to neighbors after a pleasant conversation. After she left, the lecture hall remained silent for several minutes. Students and professor alike processed the implications of what they had experienced during a semester that began with traditional academic intimidation and ended with a demonstration of power so absolute that it required no acknowledgement or validation. Professor Veltos dismissed class early, understanding that no further discussion could match the lesson Emma had just provided about the nature of true predatory dominance. As students gathered their belongings and filed out of the hall, they carried with them a new understanding of their place in galactic hierarchies that had shifted permanently during one semester of advanced xenobiology.